In the last stream, we were working on setting up this create train right here to automatically bring lava from the nether through to the overworld and deposit that lava into this fluid cell. The reason that we set that up in the last stream was so that we could work on automating the production of these compressed mechanisms. Because to do this, we have to take the basic mechanisms, which we have already automated. Those are being produced on that back line right there. Still not being produced as fast as they could be due to the fact that we are limited by how fast we're making the creosote, but those are coming in automatically. At the moment, we are selling those automatically to generate revenue, and we are now up at over $5 million. But the plan now is going to be to take those and process them either using this recipe sequence with the mechanical press, 2 deployers, and a spout, or using the pressure chamber from Pneumaticcraft. This one does require 1 mechanism and you get 1 compressed mechanism. The other recipe is a 4 to 4, but you only need 1 of each other item. So here we would need 4 compressed iron, 4 Invar rods, and 4 batches of lava to get 4 compressed mechanism, whereas here we only need 1 compressed iron, 1 Invar rod, and 1 lava to turn 4 basic mechanisms into 4 compressed mechanisms, which of course can then be sold to the shop for a great deal more than the initial basic mechanism, which is good. Also, these are required for a lot of crafting recipes going forward as well. A lot of the stuff that we don't currently have is kind of gated behind these compressed mechanisms. For example, one of the things that I would like to make today is the energy transmitter here. This is a nifty device I've not actually played with from the Create Ender transmission, and I believe the idea here is that we can use this to wirelessly move some of our Create rotational energy. So right now, we're using a plethora of shafts and gearboxes and cogwheels to get our Create rotational energy where it needs to go. However, I believe the idea with the energy transmitter here is that we can take 2 of these, put 1 of them down on the source of the rotational energy, so on the water wheels or on the cogwheel that's on the rotational speed controller, and then we can put the other one wherever that rotational energy is needed without having to run a staggeringly long line of shaft to get that energy from one place to another. There's also stuff here like the rotational compressor. This is super nifty, but it does require a compressed mechanism. So I think initially we are going to have to use this recipe to get our first few compressed mechanisms, but once we have a couple of these, we can then set up things like the rotational compressor, which we are going to be able to use in this pack to turn our create rotational energy into pressure from the Pneumaticcraft mod, which we can then of course use to get even more compressed mechanisms. So to make the initial batch using the recipe sequence, we need a mechanical press, 2 deployers, and a spout for lava. Between streams, I've gone ahead and added 1 more bit of belt here. Essentially, all I did was place down a new shaft. So I took some shaft, I did this, because previously our belt went from here to here, and then if you just go here to here, even though this one isn't rotating, because this is rotating, the whole system still works. This shaft is then no longer required, and the whole system works fine. From there, we can go and take this spout. It does mean we're going to lose the lava in there, but lava is now infinite, of course, thanks to the hose pulley in the nether, and we can go ahead and put that down right about here. And then if we were to reconfigure this setup by putting the mechanical press at the front like that, and then having the 2 deployers go down afterwards, ideally going down here and here like that, and of course rotate that if it does indeed face the wrong way. There we go. This now should be basically ready to go in terms of making our first compressed mechanism. We just need to get lava into the spout, and then at least 1, but ideally multiple Invar rods and compressed iron gears into these deployers. So the Invar rods are kind of the easier of the 2, because to make Invar, we just need to take iron and nickel, and for the time being, we can just put that iron and nickel into the alloy kiln, and I'm fairly certain that that should make us some Invar. Going forward, we're probably going to want to use a different method for processing that, but for the time being, that should work, and in fact, I am going to go ahead and get a full stack of nickel here, just so it's all ready to go. Over here, if we do this and this, 1 nickel and 2 iron gets you 3 Invar, and then from there, we can use the rolling mill that we made in a previous episode to convert the Invar ingots into Invar rods. For example, if we put this down right about here, like that, that is immediately going to overstress our system. That's fine. If we bring that down, that brings us back online. and I'm fairly certain that we can pipe and or hopper into here, but for now, if we just drop that in, we get Invar rods. Nice. The slightly harder part is getting these compressed iron gears. However, at the end of the last episode, we did purchase our first hermit, which gave us the ability to buy tiny TNT. And at least initially, the way that we get compressed iron is by taking regular iron and blowing it up with any TNT, but right now we only have access to the tiny TNT. This is not a perfect conversion. If we look at the recipe for the compressed iron, it is going to tell us that the explosion is lossy. Essentially, it says average material loss rate is 20%, which means for every 5 iron that we throw down, we're probably only going to get about 4 compressed iron back. So we lose 20% of the iron in the conversion. In the future, we're going to use a different method. We're going to use the multi-block compressor from Pneumaticcraft to make that compressed iron. That is not a lossy process. And so for now, this should just be a case of doing something like this. And ideally, you don't want to lose that iron. We got it. Quick slash home, just to make sure. And in an ideal world, you probably want to do that a little bit higher up so that when you do ignite the TNT, it doesn't fall directly through the platform and you don't have to jump down after it. Either way, now that we have 45 compressed iron, we can now look at making some of those compressed iron gears. Thankfully, they are not particularly difficult to make. To make the compressed iron gears, all we have to do is craft 4 compressed iron around 1 iron nugget. In the future, we're going to be able to use the multi-servo press, but the multi-servo press does require a machine frame, which requires an integrated circuit, which is something that we are not anywhere close to being able to make today. And so for now, we can just grab some iron nuggets out of the system and do a quick manual craft like this and like this. That is going to get us some compressed iron gears. And now I think we basically have everything that we need in order to make a couple of these compressed mechanisms. We'll take some of the basic mechanisms that we already have, and then over here, we're going to put the compressed iron in first, the Invar rods in second, and then finally, last but not least, we do need the spout to get filled with lava, so we are going to have to run a pump from here round over to that spout. That should be fine, although actually, because this is only temporary, and because we're not going to use this process automatically forever, I think what I might do instead is quickly make another fluid cell, put that down next to the spout, and then manually use a bucket to move the lava back and forth so that we can do this in a fairly short period of time. Thankfully, the fluid cells, super easy to make, and I'm pretty sure we already have buckets ready to go. We do. So if we put this down right about here, we can once again set the left to output, like so, put the lava in like that, and we should be basically good to go. We can also do this and this for now whenever we want more lava in there. And so if I put the basic mechanisms in, those should get stamped, should get applied, and lavaed, and that should get us, ideally, and again, this is not a barrel, which is my mistake. It does need to be a barrel if we're going to put stuff on top of it like that. Thankfully, we did make multiple barrels in the last episode, and so we should be able to quickly get rid of this, put down this, and boom, we have 6 compressed mechanisms, which will complete this quest just as soon. Oh, the quest wants us to make a different kind of compressed iron that we don't have. Thankfully, it looks like, somewhat awkwardly, if we take the iron, craft it down, we go from the Pneumaticraft iron to this Enigmatica iron, and then if we craft that back up, we do get the compressed iron that the quest book wants us to have. That's a very bizarre interaction. Usually the quest would accept either, but as a reward here, we do get even more of these compressed mechanisms, which of course we could sell, but right now I don't really think there's much of a benefit to selling these because we already have so much money and we can, as I mentioned earlier, use these for crafting. So I think the very first thing that we are going to want to craft here is the rotational compressor and the pressure tube, because we're going to want to set up this pressure chamber to make compressed iron more easily. The idea being here that once we have the pressure chamber, we can just turn 1 iron ingot into 1 compressed iron without having to buy, place down, and trigger the TNT, all while losing 20% of our iron. To make the pressure chamber, we need some pressure chamber wall, we need some pressure chamber valves, at least 2 pressure chamber interfaces if we want to fully automate it, and then optionally some pressure chamber glass. Let me go ahead and bookmark all of that. So pressure chamber wall, pressure chamber glass, valves, and the pressure chamber interface. And then in order to complete the other quest, this one right here, we need either a rotational compressor or a liquid compressor or an air compressor. In this pack, the air compressor does require the rotational compressor, and I think the same is probably true of the liquid compressor as well. Yeah, the liquid compressor requires the air compressor, which requires the rotational compressor, and I don't really think there's much of a point in upgrading, at least for now, the rotational compressor to the air compressor, because the air compressor, which is from Pneumaticcraft, runs on fuel. However, the rotational compressor, which is from the compressed creativity mod, just runs on create rotational energy, which we already have being made. And so essentially we're going to be able to run this pressure chamber without having to provide it fuel, which is going to be ideal. To make it, we need some pressure tube. The pressure tube is just glass and compressed iron, easy enough. And then after that, we need one propeller, which is 4 iron plates and an andesite alloy. Right now, we have 3 out of the 4 required iron plates. And if I'm not mistaken, can we make the other iron plate by doing this? We totally can. Fantastic. That should be everything for our propeller. And then the item that we're going to need quite a lot of is reinforced bricks. These are made by crafting reinforced stone, and the reinforced stone is made by crafting regular stone with compressed iron. I'm going to assume we don't have enough stone. We do not. That's fine. Between streams, I did move a bunch of cobblestone over into our system just so that we're not doing a bunch of running back and forth to the cobblestone generator to get stone whenever we need it. And speaking of the cobblestone generator, between streams, I did also go ahead and throw down a storage drawer for cobblestone over here, and I put a void upgrade into that drawer just in the same way that we did for the coal coke in the last stream as well. So over here, cobblestone is now being generated. We can store up to 2048 of it, and any more that is generated after that will just get deleted, so we won't end up with cobblestone spewing everywhere, which is good. So back over here, as soon as we have enough stone, we should be able to craft up our first batch of reinforced stone, and then from there we can craft that into these reinforced bricks, and those reinforced bricks can be used to make this rotational compressor, which should complete the quest. It does. Now, in order to make the actual multi-block, we need quite a bit of pressure chamber wall, which is, you guessed it, made with even more of these reinforced bricks. The pressure chamber itself is a 3x3x3 multi-block, so the exact same size as the coke ovens. And so let's quickly get as much stone as we can, craft up ideally even more of this reinforced stone here, which we can actually get 2 batches of now. And so I think that we might have what it takes here, if we craft that all into reinforced stone brick, to craft at least 1 batch of pressure chamber wall, but I think we are going to need 2. And then from there, we need 1 pressure chamber valve, which is 4 wall and 1 tube, although we only need 1 valve, and so this does cost more tubes for the amount of valve that you get, but again, 1 valve is all we need to set up the initial chamber, and thankfully these pressure chamber interfaces are made in batches of 2 by default, which is good, and I'm going to make 1 pressure chamber glass as well. This is completely cosmetic and completely optional, but it is going to make it easier for me to show off what is happening inside of the pressure chamber. So initially I'm going to put this down maybe over here, but we will definitely move this in the not so distant future because we're probably going to want it much closer to our lava source so that we can automate the bucketing and the transferring of those buckets into the pressure chamber for this recipe. But initially, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put down the rotational compressor right about here, and that might need rotating actually using the hammer because I'm fairly certain that that side there needs to be facing that way. What I might do here, I was going to set up a horribly janky system where I put down the compressor right on the large cogwheel and then build the pressure chamber kind of floating next to it just to show how it works. But what we can probably do instead is look at actually seeing if we can get these to work. Because if we can get these energy transmitters, that means that we can take the energy from that cogwheel and of course set it up anywhere in the world. So to make 2 energy transmitters, we need 4 reinforced stone, 2 shafts, 2 capacitors. These are redstone torches with copper and zinc sheets. That should be fine. Do we have any sheets? We do. We have copper sheets. That's perfect. Over here, I did smelt up some zinc between streams. We've got 80 in the system. Let me take a couple of those, and if we just quickly whack them down on here, to do that, we'll probably have to pick these up and also pick that up temporarily. And a few zinc sheets later, we should be able to make at least 2 capacitors. Perfect. And now all we need is another precision mechanism. I think what we'll do in this scenario, we do still have the spare deployer to make this work, I think I'm going to make quite a few precision mechanisms here, because I think we're going to need those quite a bit going forward as well. And so I think what we'll do is we'll take, let's say 12 gold ingots here. We'll turn those all into gold sheets, and then we'll see if we can't make like 12 precision mechanisms. Some of those are going to get lost, of course, to the fact that sometimes you get random salvage, but that should leave us hopefully around 10 precision mechanisms, which is going to mean that going forward, we shouldn't have to spend quite so much time making them every single time that we need one. Alright, so we ended up making way more gold sheets than I initially intended to. I just shift-clicked it in the terminal, and we ended up with like 23 gold sheets, and so I started making all of these precision mechanisms. We've got a couple here that are some portion of the way through being complete, but we do have 11 completed precision mechanisms here, and so now back in our crafting terminal, we should be able to make our first energy transmitter just as soon as we make some more reinforced stone, because crucially, this recipe does not require the reinforced stone bricks, it requires just the regular reinforced stone. Thankfully, completing that quest does give us a bunch more of these energy transmitters, which is incredibly useful. And so I'm assuming that we can put one of these down, let's say right about there. That's going to immediately overstress the system. And so I think what we're also going to want to do then is potentially look at getting a better source of rotational energy. Something we mentioned previously was the steam engines and their associated boiler from Create as well, especially given how easy it is for us to make a blaze burner. The steam engine itself is fairly straightforward. 1 gold sheet, 1 andesite alloy, and 1 block of copper. We should have everything we need there. If we need a gold sheet, it should be in here. This was just a piece of scrap that we got as part of making those precision mechanisms. Boom and boom. In terms of making a boiler, we just need a couple of Create tanks. I do believe we made one, but I think the one we made is on our train currently, and so we are going to have to make a few more here. Thankfully, again, not particularly difficult to make. They do require more of these copper sheets, which, again, thankfully can be crafted either with the enigmatic hammer or just with the engineer's hammer, actually. And so if we do something like this, we are going to now get 4. We can always get more in the future. And then, ideally, we're also going to want to get at least 1 blaze burner. And that should be basically everything that we need for a very basic boiler. So if I were to go ahead and pick up these stripped logs that we have right here, let me change that to shapeless, we should be able to place down the blaze burner and then place 4 tanks on top like that. As soon as you place those down, those are going to connect, and as soon as we place down a steam engine connected to that, we should see it transform into a boiler. And it does. It gives us the size, the water, and the heat of that boiler. So now, I think really the only thing that we're going to be missing here is unlimited water, because we can, for now, give fuel to the blaze burner, and that will allow it to run. I think even without fuel, though, the blaze burner does just provide heat to the boiler here. If we want to get water into there, that's where things get a little trickier. I do see that the sink is available, and actually the sink looks pretty straightforward here. It requires 3 iron ingots, 1 bucket of water, and 5 terracotta. That terracotta, of course, just requires clay. Clay, of course, we can just purchase from the shop. And so if we get 5 clay, we can then divvy that up amongst our 3 furnaces. Boom, boom, and boom. And as soon as that is done, we just need 1 single bucket of water, which we already have. That's going to get us the sink, which, for those who don't know, is just a block version of an unlimited water source. And after that, I guess all we would want to do is get another one of these, although I do believe that now that we have access to these compressed mechanisms, I'm pretty sure that we can make the fluid pipe from pipes. We can. It requires 6 fluid pipes, 2 buckets, and the compressed mechanism. How many pipes do we have? We have got 3, so I do need a few more of those, which requires even more copper sheets. Again, thankfully, those are craftable with the old hammer. Let me not shift-click that because I don't want to turn all of my copper into sheets. Instead, I would like to make just 1 more set so that we can make our first batch of fluid pipes. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we should be able to configure these fluid pipes with that same engineer's hammer. If not, we might have to make a pipes wrench, but I think that should just work. So let's go ahead and take all of that terracotta, dump it in the system, and craft up our sink. Nice. And so with this, if we put this down, let's say right about here, we should then be able to place down a fluid pipe. If we shift right click with our wrench right here, that's going to set the fluid pipe to extract. That is now pulling from the 2.14 million buckets that are in the sink, and it's going to put water into the boiler, which means that now if we take a shaft and put it down right about here, that is going to start to rotate. Nice. And you'll see that we have 2,048 stress units here, even without giving the blaze burner any fuel, which is good because that means it's effectively the same as 4 of these water wheels, and we can put down more of these as we go forward. If we give the blaze burner fuel, you'll see that jumps up all the way to 16,384 stress units, which is massive. That would require 32 water wheels all down at the same time for that to work. We can then take our ender transmitter, put that down right about here, and I'm not quite sure. Actually, my question has been answered. I was going to say I'm not quite sure how this works in terms of frequency, but it looks like we can set up to 10 frequencies here, which I think is fine. So if we set that to network 1 and tick, over here, we should then be able to put that down like this, throw down our rotational compressor next to it, make sure, of course, that that is facing the right way, like this, and we have now wirelessly moved that create rotational energy. Nice. In terms of automating the 16,384 stress units, we have 2 options. We could either automatically pump the coal coke that we're making, because don't forget we are making excess coal coke right here, so we could use this fuel to power that blaze burner. I believe all we'd have to do is use either an item pipe or a hopper to pump it into the blaze burner automatically. I should really fill that hole in the ground in so that I don't fall through into the abyss every time we walk by. Alternatively, we could also use the straw that we mentioned in the last episode. That's this guy right here, and that's going to allow us to pump lava from our lava tank directly into the blaze burner to give it fuel that way. Either would work. They're both automatic ways of producing the same stress. But for now, let's see if we can't kind of show this working. I think I am going to move this. So I know I've just put it down, but I want to put this down closer to the lava. And I think specifically, I'm going to build this kind of out on the backside here. To do that, we could definitely do with more space. So I'm going to quickly get some grass and make this a bit bigger, and then we'll set our pressure chamber up on the backside. Okay, so I've made the platform a bit bigger behind the coke ovens here, and all we're going to do now is place down a 3x3 of pressure chamber wall, like this. We're then going to put down our pressure chamber valve on the back. I'm going to put it right here. We'll put our interfaces down here and here. You do want to make sure you put them down in the right way, because if you put them both down like this, you'll see they're both blue on the outside. Blue is the input and orange is the output, so you do want to make sure that one of them is blue on the outside and that one of them is orange on the inside. You can rotate with the wrench, but this is what you want. You can also just put them down like this, and so long as you put them both down in the same direction, it will work. And then from there, I'm going to put the glass on the front like this so we can see into the pressure chamber, and then the rest of this just needs to be pressure chamber wall. You'll know that you've built this correctly because when you put down the final block, it's going to form a multi-block. And then over here, this is now broken. And the reason for that is that we got too much pressure inside of the compressor. So the compressor has a max pressure of 5 bar. As you can see here, it says max pressure 5 bar. Thankfully, I think we should be able to make another one of these. I think I just need to get a few more of these iron plates. If we take 4 of those, I believe we should be able to make another propeller. And I think that's almost everything for another compressor. Nice. And we could even make another one if we wanted to, which we might want to at some point in the not so distant future. One thing that we should also do here to prevent that happening in the future is we should make a safety tube module. This, if we hold shift, will vent high pressure air if the tube pressure reaches 4.9 bar. Although this prevents explosions, released air is energy loss and wastes fuel. That is completely fine. For that, we need 4 gold and 1 compressed iron, which we do have so long as we put the compressed iron into the system. And oh no, the gold is over here. I did start smelting more because of course I turned all of mine into plates earlier. But if we get a pressure gauge, we can then go ahead and craft up 2 levers, and that should be everything for the safety tube module. It is. And so essentially all we need to do here is use the pressure tubing to kind of vent the pressure coming out of the compressor. unfortunately, this rotational compressor does not seem to have any kind of interface, so it's kind of hard to see how much pressure is in there. However, if we connect this up to our pressure chamber valve, we will see the pressure in the chamber go up, and that's the same amount of pressure that's in the rotational compressor. For now, I'm going to do that. That's just kind of deleting all of the pressure, which is, of course, not really what we want. We want to get that pressure into the pressure chamber, but to do that, we are going to need at least like 2 or 3 more of these pressure tubes, which thankfully are pretty easy to make. And so back over here, let's see if we can't get this pressure chamber up and running. So if I put these tubes down here, here, and here, that is going to connect this up. And in here, we can now see this pressure gauge is going to show us the amount of pressure that's in this little network. What we're also going to do is we're going to take our safety tube module. You'll see it says inline no. That means that we can put this down anywhere on here. I'll put it right there. So long as it's on one of these tubes, once this gets to 4.9 bar, it's going to release some pressure to prevent the system from getting up to 5 bar, because as we saw, if it gets to 5 bar, the whole thing blows up, which is not ideal. But this is now gaining pressure slowly but surely. You'll see we're between 0 and 1 bar. And at the top there, you can actually see that we're at 0.58 out of 5 bar and climbing. If we want to make some of the compressed iron, that can be done in here, but does require a pressure of between 2 and 5 bar. And so what we can do is we can use either a hopper or some item pipes to pump into the input side of the pressure chamber, into one of the pressure chamber interfaces. And if we put some iron in there, that iron's going to make its way into the actual pressure chamber. And once we get the pressure high enough, it should just get converted into compressed iron, at which point, of course, we want to take that compressed iron and use it, I think, in another pressure chamber to make the compressed mechanism, because we, I think, are going to want to have one pressure chamber continually making compressed iron, and I think it's going to make sense for us to have a second dedicated pressure chamber for making the compressed mechanisms. For now, if we do this and we do this, that iron is going to make its way in to the pressure chamber. And as soon as the pressure gets high enough, as I said, it should convert and it should get sent out to this other side. And if I'm not mistaken, it should auto-eject into whichever inventory we put there. And so I'm going to quickly grab another storage drawer. I'm also going to grab another storage downgrade to allow us to kind of stop the system from producing a never-ending amount of compressed iron, because I think we're really only going to need a buffer of 64. And so if we do this and this, what we should now be able to do is kind of take the iron that we already have being made over here, pump that iron around into here, so into this side of the pressure chamber, and as you'll see, the pressure is now above 2, and so over here, we should any second now start to see that iron that we piped in getting converted into compressed iron. And look at that, we've got compressed iron. The more iron that you put in, the longer it will take for this to complete, so we did have to wait for the pressure to get a little bit higher, but this has now worked, and we have a full stack of compressed iron because we put a full stack of iron in. Nice. Whilst I was waiting for that to process, I've started on a lower level to the platform. For now, a very rudimentary lower level, just a little grass platform here. I've also crafted some torches because otherwise mobs will spawn. It is eternally day, so we're not going to get mobs spawning on our primary platform, but down here where there is no sunlight, it's definitely a possibility. And so what I am hoping to do here is I'm hoping to connect our pre-existing iron drawer, which is right here, to our integrated dynamics system. Essentially in the exact same way that we've done with these chests right here. If we get some more item interfaces and we get some more of this logic cable, we should be able to run this logic cable over under the platform to that drawer. And if we place this item interface onto the bottom of that storage drawer, so right here like that, we can then run this down and along back to our pre-existing logic cable, and that is going to give us 2 immediate benefits. The first immediate benefit, of course, is that it's going to allow us to access all of our iron from within the terminal. So we no longer have to go back and forth to the iron. Whoops, we have managed to get stuck. That's fine. This is where /home comes in tremendously useful. But we no longer have to go back to the iron to get it. Instead, we can just use it via the system. The second benefit is that the same mod that adds the item interface also adds item importers and exporters. So the idea here is that we can use the item exporter from the integrated tunnels mod to export iron from this storage drawer directly into the pressure chamber, which is going to make our lives a whole heck of a lot easier. So real quick, let me dig out wherever the heck that logic cable was just placed, and let's see if we can't run this cable over to that iron drawer. And not too long later, we now have a cable that runs up to the iron drawer and runs all the way along to right next to the pressure chamber. So now, back over here, if we look, we have access to all 1,229 iron ingots, and we also have access to those iron ingots in nugget and block form, which is going to be super useful for crafting. On top of that, the cable is now ready to export over at the other side. And so if we were to go ahead and make ourselves one of these item exporters, which is going to require another batch of item interfaces, that is fine. The exporters, thankfully, super easy. One item interface with one output variable transformer. We made a bunch of these in a previous episode when we were setting up the crafting terminal itself, and boom, we get an item exporter. Now, in order to get this to work, we are also going to need to get a variable card, and if I'm not mistaken, all we should have to do now is over here, we want to put the item exporter onto the input side of the pressure chamber, like this. You'll also hear that pressure being released. That is because you'll see at the top, we're up at 4.9 bar. That then gets decreased back down to a safer level to prevent anything from blowing up. If we do this and this, now in here, we need to say that we want this to export a specific item. Now, if we want this to export a specific item, which is what we do want, we are going to have to do a little bit more programming here. And for that, I think we need a logic programmer, that being this guy right here. It's nowhere near as daunting as it sounds. All we need to do is place this guy down somewhere in the world, let's say here. And then in here, this looks worse than it is, I promise. All we need to do is grab an iron ingot, because that is the item that we want to export, place the variable card in, select item, select iron ingot, and take it out. And we now have a variable card that is set to item iron ingot. And back over here, if we put that variable card in to the export item tag, it should export iron. Look at that. And it put a full stack in. That full stack is then going to get processed. And right now, this is actually full, so it won't actually get exported. The compressed iron will sit in, I believe, the output side. So we will have a few stacks of iron kind of set in here as a bit of a buffer. But this should be basically good to go and should just keep making compressed iron for us, because the iron is going to be continually exported via that logic cable. But for now, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and basically duplicate this setup that we have right here. So I'm going to get another pressure chamber. I'm going to get another one of these rotational compressors, and I'm going to set that up next to our pre-existing pressure chamber here. And that is going to be the pressure chamber that actually makes the compression mechanisms. All right, so I've set up another pressure chamber here. It's the exact same, it's just flipped. Over here, this isn't working, because you'll see at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see, but it says that this doesn't work with the rotation in this direction. Essentially here, I think that we need to move this and have it go through a gearbox so that this can actually spin, at which point we can do this, and that should begin to increase the pressure. As you can see at the top there, once again, we are going to have to make another safety tube module to prevent that from exploding, but thankfully these should be pretty straightforward. Now, I've also gone ahead and duplicated our pre-existing setup. Let's just do this. That is going to work. I've duplicated the setup that we had for iron. So over here, I've got another buyer right here. This one's going to be set to buy nickel. And then down here, we've got the depot. We've got the encased fan. I've just run even more encased chain drives along over to here. And we've got a depot there, and we've got a compacting drawer that we're going to put our nickel into. And then, of course, on the underside, we can put another item interface to connect this up in the exact same way that we've connected the iron up. Now, I have put down a pretty pipe here with an extraction module, which, of course, is the same as what we have for iron. However, the Twitch chat has made me aware of the fact that we can actually make a puller module for functional storage, which I believe is going to allow us to just pull automatically from an adjacent inventory. So if I do this and get a couple of these drawers, we should be able then to make some of these puller upgrades. Let me get one more hopper here, and boom. And I'm assuming that with this, we can kind of get rid of the pretty pipes that we're using to pull into the storage drawers. This isn't filterable, I don't think. Like, I don't know if you can filter what gets pulled. Of course, right now, because there is nickel in here, it's going to go ahead and pull the nickel. What we can do, though, is we can lock the drawers. Annoyingly, if we want to make the locking tool, we need an emerald. I don't think... Never mind, we can totally buy emeralds. Okay, so if I take this, can I squeeze this? I can indeed squeeze this for a chance to get extra emeralds. So if I do this, can I then crank out an emerald and use that in the creation of the configuration tool? We totally can. By default, this is in locking mode, and if we right-click a drawer, you'll see we get a little lock at the top. Now that means that even when it's empty, it's still locked to whatever item was in it previously, and so ideally over here, that means that if we lock this and we lock this, going forward, even if we run out of nickel or iron, because these are locked, the raw nickel and raw iron is never going to make its way over, and presumably that means that we can now pick up these pipes here and instead just use the puller upgrades to pull the item in. Right-click in a GUI to change direction. So we want this facing... We are currently facing north. As you can see, it says right here in the bottom left, and so we want to make sure that this is set to north. Nice. And then we do the same thing over here, change this to north, and that should now pull everything in. All we need to do is extract from this buyer onto the depot and make sure that the buyer is set to buy nickel. At that point, we should then be able to use both the nickel and the iron to make Invar. So do we have a spare funnel? We do. Fantastic. And let's go ahead and grab one nickel from the store. Perfect. Quick slash back, and then we should be able to do both this and, of course, this. And so now, if we want to make the Invar here, I think we're going to have to use another create mixer with a heated blaze burner, because the alloy kiln here isn't automatable. You can't pump into and or out of the alloy kiln, and so I think we're going to have to make another mechanical mixer with another basin, and we're going to have to get another blaze burner that we feed continuously with fuel to allow us to automate the production of Invar. Okay, so I've gone ahead and made a basin, another mechanical whisk, I've picked up our rolling mill, and I've made another blaze burner. So now, we need to start thinking about getting all of the different items into this interface here. Thankfully, what we can do, in exactly the same way as we've done here, we can use the exporter to export what it is that we want to export. Now, before we used the variable card and we selected an item, I'm fairly certain that if we put this variable card in here, we can select a list right here, and we can set the list to items, and then from there we can add the items that we want to add to the list. For example, one of those items was a compressed iron gear. So in here, if we take a compressed iron gear, I believe that we can then add that to the list. So we can go list, and then click the plus, add the gear, and then we can click another plus, and we can add more items, and effectively we're going to create a list here that is all of the items that we want to export. And if we put that into the exporter, that should work. Also, I think you can just craft these to wipe them if you've got them not fully set up. So that's the goal. And that does mean that we don't really have to set things up anywhere near to each other. Right now, we do have things set up in a very condensed way. For example, we've got both our iron and nickel setup kind of embedded in the middle of this create contraption. But now that we have integrated dynamics exporters, we could in fact move all of the ore processing out to like its own separate part of the island, and then just use the integrated dynamics cable to export it wherever it's needed. Even, for example, over here to this basin, we could just export the iron nuggets without having this pretty pipe here. And so at some point, I think we probably will end up moving this. But what we need to do now is I think we need to get more fluid pipes, because we need to have this blaze burner running continuously to make Invar. And to do that, I think the easiest way for us to do it is going to be with the straw that we saw before. The straw here is just bamboo through the roller. The roller we have, if I temporarily place that back down, bamboo is purchasable from the shop. I'm going to buy 2. And if we run both of those through the roller here, that should get us 2 straws. Nice. We can then right-click those straws onto a blaze burner to allow it to receive fuel. And from there, if we were to get even more of these fluid pipes, that's going to allow us to make even more of these fluid pipes. And I think we're going to need quite a few of these because of the way that we've positioned our tank here, because somewhat awkwardly, I think we're going to try and not get hit by the train, and instead, we're going to kind of run fluid pipes from here. If we set the left to output, like that, I think that's correct, it is indeed. We can then shift right click here and here to disconnect that, shift right click here to set it to extract, again shift right click here and here, even though the lava can't go into the coke oven, I think it's just good practice there. And we are going to run that fluid pipe around to this side of the base. So let's do this, this, and this, making sure to disconnect this as we go. And then we're going to run this lava to 2 different locations. The first location is, of course, going to be to this blaze burner here. That's going to allow us to run the heated whisk. So we want to put the basin above that and the mechanical mixer above that. Something like this. We want to make sure, of course, that the basin doesn't fill with lava. So let me do that and that. Perfect. And then if I break and replace that, I think I'll get rid of the lava, but it might also just reconnect again. It didn't. Good. And so now what we should be able to do is we should be able to give the straw to the blaze burner, and immediately that blaze burner is going to start taking the lava, and it will be forever active because of the fact that we have an unlimited supply of lava. The second thing that we need to do is we need to get the lava into bucket form, because if we look again at the recipe here for this mechanism, it requires a bucket of lava. So we are going to have that lava go into a bucket, and then once it's gone through the actual compressor, it's going to come back out the other side as an empty bucket. Thankfully, we can just use a depot and a spout to make that happen. And not too long later, we have a spout with a depot, and I've moved the pre-existing fluid cell and the pre-existing spout that we made earlier in the episode. And so now, if we have a bucket, we can just place that bucket onto the depot. That is going to transform an empty bucket into a lava-filled bucket, where they're going to send that around into the pressure chamber interface, and then on the outside here, we're going to get a bucket back. We just need to feed that bucket around back to this depot, and the cycle will continue. At least that is the idea. So over here, we need to get another item exporter, and we need to use that item exporter to export both iron and nickel. So again, this is one of those situations where the list feature will actually be quite useful. So if we take 1 iron and 1 nickel over here, put the variable card in, go to list, select, add an item, we're going to add iron, add an item, we're going to add nickel, take the variable card out, this is now set to both iron and nickel, /back, over here, we're going to put the item exporter onto the basin, so I'll put that down, let's say right here, we're then going to run cable over to this, and as soon as we have cable on this, we should be able to put our variable card in. We want to put this to export items, plural, right here, and that should now export both iron and nickel. I believe this will hold up to 16 of each when it's exported automatically, and as soon as we connect that up, that should start working. And there we go. Now that the cable is connected, you'll see it's exported 16 iron and 16 nickel. The only tricky bit now is actually getting rotational energy up to there. Thankfully, we do have a gearbox here, and if we wanted to, we could actually swap this out for a vertical gearbox like this, and from there we can just run some shaft upwards like this, and if we have enough cogwheels, which I'm fairly certain we do because we're getting them infinitely from our scrap production system over here, and then we can just do something like this, like this, like this, and like this, and boom, we've got Invar being made. And so now, back over at home, we should be able to craft yet another storage drawer. That storage drawer is going to again require a downgrade because we don't want to turn all of our iron and nickel into Invar, just some of it, and we can also make another puller upgrade as well. That's going to allow us again to pull the Invar, I believe, directly out of the basin into the drawer, which we'll lock with our configuration tool, and then finally we just need another item interface to put onto that drawer to make the Invar then accessible to the system. So over here, if we put down the drawer, we can then put down the puller. If we set the puller to this direction, which is now west, we can right click to west. That is going to pull the wrong item. That is kind of fine. Let me go back in here and change that to something that's not west. Take the iron out, put some Invar in. Let's lock the drawer to Invar. This is why we need the locking tool. Now, if we leave that, we should be able to change this back to west, and it should only pull Invar, again, until we have 64. As soon as we put the downgrade in, there we go, that's why we need both the upgrades, Isaac. Once we have all of that in there, now we're going to bank up on Invar in the basin, and once it's fully backed up on Invar in the basin, it's going to stop using our iron and nickel, which is good. And then we can do this and this, and now our Invar is available to the system so that in a second, once we go to export, we can export all three things. The thing that's going to be a little tricky, I guess, is exporting the lava via the export cable. We might have to have a storage drawer as well that holds the lava bucket, just so that we can then connect that up as well with an item interface to make all of the stuff accessible to the system. One more thing we're going to have to do before that, though, is we are going to have to craft the compressed iron into compressed iron gears. There are a few ways we could do that. Right now we can't make the multi-servo press, so we are either going to have to do it with the mechanical crafters, which would work but are a bit tedious, or we can make something like the crafter here from RF Tools. This is pretty straightforward. It requires 2 blue dye, which we can get from Lapis. Lapis we can purchase in ore form from the shop, and again, if we quickly give that a squeeze over here, that's going to allow us to get some blue dye. We do only need 2 blue dye. And so in here, if we do this and this, that should be everything for our first machine frame, assuming we have gold nuggets, which I don't think we do. Boom and boom. And then from there, it's 2 redstone torches and 2 standard Minecraft crafting tables. And that's going to get us a very powerful auto crafter from RF Tools. We could upgrade this further, but for now, that's not at all necessary because right now this can do 2 crafts and we only need it to do 1. Now, I do want this crafter to have power, and we are generating power over here with these 2 generators. So my next question is, can we make the energy pipe here from pipes? We totally can. To do that, we do need some redstone torches. That is completely fine. Other than that, we just need 1 compressed mechanism and 6 iron. Boom. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make 2 batches. That is our last compressed mechanism. That might not have been the best idea, but I think it should be fine. So what we'll do is we're going to drag the power out. This is obviously a horrendous cable that we will change, but if we were to put our crafter down, say right here, the reason I've put it there is that I'm fairly certain that the puller module also has a sister module called the pusher module. This guy right here. That's going to work in the exact same way that the puller does, but if we put this into the drawer, that is going to allow us to send the compressed iron directly into the crafter. And so if we do this, we can then take that crafter. We are going to need to get another item exporter though, because we also need to export the iron nuggets as well, don't forget, to that crafter. So let's do this and this. We'll take this guy. And then before we leave here, let me also clear some of this junk out that's collecting on the floor. Let's instead grab an iron nugget and quickly add that to a variable card. So boom, item, iron nugget. Cool. Now, back over here, what we should be able to do is we should be able to put this into here and have that send down into the crafter. We should also be able to put an exporter onto the bottom of this, like so, place down a logic cable like this, and go ahead and throw in our item card to export iron nuggets. And of course, as soon as we connect that up to our main system, ideally not like that, I kind of wanted this to go underneath this block here, which we can do, I think, if I do this and that, and maybe even, I was hoping I could put it under that dirt block as well, but that's fine. We can go under the platform and connect that up soon. That should export both the iron nuggets and the compressed iron to this crafter. And then in here, we can double click on this recipe to edit it, click over here to set the recipe, like so, click apply, and now as soon as we give this guy power, which we can do by setting this pipe here to extract. Again, shift right click with a wrench, or in our case, the engineer's hammer. That's going to start sending power around into here. Not much, but some. And now, as soon as there is enough stuff in here, we should see the gear get made. Nice. We can then have that go directly into another storage drawer. Let's say right about here, like that. Again, we can put a puller module into that to pull from that crafter, as well as, of course, a downgrade to make sure that we do not make more than a stack, and then another item interface to connect it up and allow it to be exported to the interface. One thing we are going to want to do is kind of just put some random junk into here to prevent the crafter from backing up with a ton of stuff that we don't want it to back up with. Essentially, if we left all of those slots empty, the crafter would back up with as many stacks of iron nuggets and as many stacks of compressed iron as it could hold. That's not tremendously bad, but it's not really useful for us. Instead, if we put in 1 stack of iron ingots and 1 stack of iron nuggets, we can click the remember current items. And now if we take these out, you'll see that there's 1 slot for iron nuggets, 1 slot for compressed iron, and the rest of these slots are locked to variable cards, which are never going to make their way in. And so now in here, we can put our pusher module back in, set it to down, and it's going to send, hopefully, those items down. So annoyingly, I don't think this is going to work. For whatever reason, this pusher module does not want to push down into the crafter here. So I think we're going to have to use like an item pipe of some persuasion, or a hopper, or some kind of other item transferring device to get the compressed iron down into here. I have gone ahead and put down the item interface on the compressed iron drawer here. This, of course, does need a downgrade and a puller to pull that over. Other than that, though, this is almost good to go. We do need to get our rolling mill over here so we can turn the Invar ingots into Invar rods. That should be pretty straightforward. We are overstressed here, but again, that should be fixable. All we would need to do there is get this straw into the blaze burner that's currently underneath our boiler. And of course, that's going to octuple our stress capacity from 2048 up to 16,384, as we saw earlier. At that point, it's probably worth moving that boiler from there over to here so that we can put it kind of closer to our lava production system. So I think we're going to call it there. We don't quite have the automation yet, of course, for this up and running. We're very close. Between streams, though, I think I'm going to have to do some reorganizational work. I'm not going to change any of the setups in the way that they currently function, but right now things are kind of slapped down or very haphazardly around the place, and I think that there's a lot of work that we can do to tidy a lot of this up. For example, I'll probably move the ore processing, like I said, out to its own area. I'll probably take down the water wheels. I really don't think that these are going to be necessary, especially now that we have these energy transmitters. Once we've got our boiler up and running, we can put down multiple blaze burners, hook them all up with lava, and get multiple of these steam engines down, each producing 16,384 stress units, and we can have that kind of centralized, and then just have all of these energy transmitters move all of the stuff around the base to where they need to go. And I think we can probably also start to phase out some of these pretty pipes and instead just kind of rely on the item interfaces and the item exporters from Integrated Dynamics to send all of the different items around to where they need to go, right? We can put a interface onto the oak drawer here, and then we can put an exporter onto the basin to keep the basin full of planks, shaft, and cogwheels. We can do that for most everything that we have, and that's going to allow us to massively simplify this setup that we have here. Not only is it going to allow us to get rid of a lot of these gearboxes, because we can replace them with the ender shafts, but it's also going to allow us to replace a lot of these pretty pipes with the Integrated Dynamics logic cables, and that's just going to allow us to tidy up a lot of what we have here, because right now, it's a bit of a mess, and it's pretty haphazard. It's going to be hard to scale up in the future, but that is a problem for future Isaac. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Forever Factory.